to discuss, well, what else? The Labour manifesto. James, welcome to the show.
Good afternoon, Nick.
A little run through. You've had time to read all 130 pages, I'm sure, of the Labour manifesto, as every single member in the country will be doing. Tell me, do they matter, manifestos, James?
They set the tram lines and they set the kind of broad parameters of where you think the government over the next 5 years might go. And if the government wants to do something that's particularly controversial or difficult. And so an example of this would be, for example, a disastrous example would be Theresa May in 2017 with, what became the dementia tax. But if they want to do something that's a bit more punchy, they can claim a mandate to do that, and that you can get a slightly easier run through Parliament by so doing. But, as we saw in 2017, it's not without risk. And what we have from Labour today is 130, whatever it is, pages. Not a lot that's actually new, not a lot that we didn't know already. There's a bit more narrative around it, but it's all very, most of the kind of headlines we basically knew already.
But for most people looking at this, if they are looking at it, or even if they're just listening to it, if they're not learning anything new, as you are pointing out, because it's been talked about for several weeks, I suppose, does that indicate that there's a lack of trust in what goes in the manifesto now? Because it's a useful tool, as you said, for a government to say that was in our manifesto, so it's got to become law and that's going to happen. But actually, for people, the assumption is generally they don't trust them, they don't believe them, and they expect them to break them. That's not a healthy place to be, is it?
Well, I mean, it's not healthy that people think that way. I think the evidence is that, and we could get into the Liberal Democrats and tuition fees, of course, but the evidence is that actually governments are generally very cautious about breaking their manifesto commitments because, when they do, and tuition fees would be a very good example of that.
Well, and social care by Boris Johnson, of course.
Well, yes, I mean, Boris Johnson said he would fix it and then nothing happened. But I mean...
Well, he was going to introduce the 2% levy and then rode back on that, didn't he? And quite who was to blame for that? But that was a clear breach as well, wasn't it?
Well, I mean, I can't remember precisely what he put in his 2019 manifesto. I think it was I think he said he had a secret plan to fix it, which seems
something like that.
But yes, I mean, what he did try to do, and what you're absolutely right on, is try to fix it. And then, there was clearly a discussion between him and Sunak about how that was funded, which resulted in the levy. And then the whole thing evaporated when Johnson did. So, but I think the kind of wider point that you make is. This is it's well written, but it's basically a safety first manifesto from Labour. They will be very leery of putting anything in there that they think they might have to break, which is why we're probably going to come on to tax rises, for example, but why they haven't gone any further on that as a good pertinent example than what we already knew.
But you see, on tax, I'm slightly frustrated, so let me spell it out. You've got actually both parties, but we'll talk about Labour. It's their manifesto today, where they're basically saying we're not going to raise 2 or 3 taxes: income tax, national insurance. We're basically promising not to do anything on that. What they're not doing is actually saying we are going, however, to have to raise some tax. Every independent expert is saying you're going to have to raise some taxes. Whether you agree with that or not, that's pretty much what it's been saying. They're leaving the door open to raise other taxes, refusing to say what they're going to do on the grounds, and this is the bit that kind of makes me chuckle a bit with frustration. On the grounds, they don't really quite know what they're going to find when they open the books, but they know enough apparently to rule out raising income tax, VAT and national insurance. It just doesn't stack up, does it?
The idea that they can promise, I think the Telegraph has kind of 8 billion, or they can only promise, for example, 8 billion over the next 4 years in tax rises from unpopular causes that we already knew about, and that's it. Doesn't seem credible. I mean, they are banking on a policy program that over time, but I think that's the key point, over time will deliver us more growth. But it will not. The economy will not grow fast enough, even if you assume they're going to be successful, to deliver them the tax money they need now. So something needs to give. My guess would be there are two things going on here. It's a safety first manifesto, as discussed. They don't want to show any. They don't want to show any hide for the Tories to take aim at. You know, that £2,000 number that Sunak's been pushing has stuck. A lot has not, but that has, and they don't want to give any credence to that at all. You can understand that in electoral terms. You know, the other point is, although they probably do know how bad it is because that's pretty publicly known, they probably don't know precisely what they're going to do about it.
James, can I just ask you on that? There's so much in the public domain. It seems pretty hard these days for them not to know how bad it is. You were a government advisor. What sort of things might they not know then that, if you like, government have hidden from us, let alone them?
Well, I think in terms of how bad it is, there's probably not a lot out there that they don't already know. You know, what they probably won't have access to is some of the Treasury internal modelling and projections, but a lot of what you don't see in public is actually the advice in terms of solutions and the kind of data. I mean, HMRC is an incredibly data-rich department. The data that government has access to in terms of kind of how you might fix it and the real effects on the ground of the policies that you want to deploy. And if I were them, I would probably be a bit cautious about going too fast in committing to doing a particular thing, say a particular tax rise, without actually having access to that kind of information.
Okay, just before we wrap up on tax, I just want a quick reminder of something Keir Starmer said about tax, because my next question is going to lead to how significant this really is in the election campaign. Let's hear from Keir Starmer.
The manifesto explicitly has taxes going up, I think in the costings pages, by about 7 to 8 billion.
The tax rises we've set out in the manifesto there's no surprises, Ben, this morning. As you will see, you'll have gone through the document quickly. You'll go through it, no doubt, at length later on. There are no tax rise that we haven't already announced. Yes, we want to bear down properly on the non-dom tax status and make sure that super rich pay their fair share in this country. Yes, we want the oil and gas companies to pay fair tax on the massive profits that they're making. Yes, we want to make sure that private equity loopholes aren't there, again, for wealthy.
I mean, there's nothing staggeringly new there that we didn't know. But are the Tories onto something, that tax is a battleground? They've got a chance, perhaps, of winning the argument, because they don't come to this with an impressive record themselves, the Conservatives, on tax.
No, but I think this is the reality. The reality is, even if by some miracle Sunak scraped back into number 10, he would also have to put up taxes. The reality is also it doesn't seem that that's going to happen. And so they can pin it squarely on Labour. And it does feel like an area where Labour know they're exposed. I mean, they're exposed by history because, you know, by disposition, Labour tend to put up taxes. Tories tend to cut spending. That just is the way the parties are wired. But they're also exposed in terms of the shape of the public finances and the fact that even if the economy does pick up, in the short term, they're still going to have to find some money from somewhere.
So what levers will they have? Today, it's pretty clear Keir Starmer's going to be relying heavily on growth in the economy so he can get more money to then go and spend on the things his backbenchers are going to want him to spend on and so forth. I suppose the question is, what levers do they really have to actually stimulate growth? He says, I'm going to build 1.5 million houses, or get built 1.5 million houses. I'm not quite sure how he's going to do that.
Well, I mean, I think this gets to it. I mean, if I were wanting to see a proper growth agenda, the areas, just ignoring what's in the manifesto for a moment, the areas that I would target would be planning. We need a lot more planning.
If his backbenchers will allow it.
Well, yes, but actually, I mean, there's a question about what their seat disposition looks like after the general election. But a more traditional Labour seat distribution, more urban seats, you would expect would find planning less problematic than a conservative government. However, but yes, a relevant point in a world where they're looking at a very large majority in non-traditional Labour areas. But you would target planning. You would probably target better trade relations, not necessarily talking about going back on Brexit, but better relations with the EU in particular, because our largest trading partner. you'd look at skills. And I mean, on those areas, I would say, their manifesto actually lands all of them. Now, we don't have the detail of that. Probably skills is the area where it's most interesting, because they're pushing hard on reform of the apprenticeship levy. They're also looking hard at whether there's a kind of devolved element to it. And so we're potentially seeing a lot more devolution.
Okay, so let's imagine July the 5th has come along. There's a shattered Conservative Party, as polls suggest may be the case, and Labour in power. Who steps up today, 3 weeks before the election? Nigel Farage, to say, I'm going to be leader of a Conservative Party. Is that a bit presumptive of him to do that at the moment? Is that pushing his luck and maybe turn off some Conservative voters who are thinking of voting for reform?
Well, it's Nigel Farage. It seems entirely characteristic of the kind of thing he would do. It is presumptuous and pushing his luck. But again, I refer you to my prior comment. Is it a scenario which could happen? It's not inconceivable that you could end up, if Farage gets elected in Clacton, that looks likely, then he is going to exert a pull on the rump Tory party in Parliament, and there will be certain MPs. We're already hearing Suella Braverman, Jacob Rees-Mogg, who will be arguing that they should merge the, in inverted commas, right vote. I mean, there's a question about whether that's actually whether that's real, but they will be arguing that, and there will be certain people on the right, on the populist right of the Tory party, who will want to join him.
Tell me though, that would split the Conservative Party, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would. Yes, it would. And if you're although I would expect the admission of Nigel Farage to be one of the issues that comes up during any subsequent Tory leadership election, if you're a new Tory leader, why the hell are you going to let Farage in? Who, the next thing he'll want to do is take your job.
Okay, listen, just before we go to the break there, James, as a result of mentioning Nigel Farage constituency, I am rightly going to read out all the other candidates there, of course, which includes Nigel Farage of Reform UK, Giles Watling, Conservative Party, Jovan of Wasu-Nepal, Labour Party, Matthew Bensilium, Liberal Democrats, and Natasha Osborne from the Green Party. Has Nigel Farage overstepped the mark by suggesting that he will be the next leader of a Conservative Party?